Today I want to talk about the future of home charging an EV. The future is no longer very far away. We now know what it looks like, and it could impact what we spend our hard-earned money on. So stick with me while I explain it. Hello everyone, I'm Andrew. Thanks for joining me on the electric transition. It's quite a windy day here today, but hopefully you won't have too much wind noise on the microphone. As I mentioned in the introduction, today I want to talk about how home charging an EV will change in the future. I think we now know how the change will look, and so it's worth us understanding it. There has long been a vision that EVs will become an important part of the electricity system, that they have a vital role to play in how our energy system functions, especially in a grid dominated by renewables, which are famously variable in nature. What are needed in a system with variable generation are two things. Firstly, we need to be able to vary demand where possible. Secondly, we need storage to fill the gaps between variable generation and necessary demand. EVs offer a bit of both of these necessary properties. Firstly, exactly when they get charged rarely matters. They often charge for less time than they sit idle between uses. In a smart world where technology takes the strain, we can hand the scheduling of our EV charging to the grid and let them do with it as they please, avoiding charging when margins are tight. But an EV could go further still. It is, after all, a big battery, and so it can offer some of the storage that our future grid needs. If the car is already being paid for and using its battery is not a detriment to us, then we could rent out its storage to the grid. That could be a win-win. It might help investors avoid the cost of some grid-style battery installations, and maybe we get a few quid in return for its use, which might help pay for the car. In the past, the grid wasn't really smart enough to enable this. It was designed for managing a few large generators, and the market didn't encourage anything else. However, we're now seeing more and more countries operate markets in ways that allow for new services, putting value on grid attributes rather than just rewarding raw power. This opens up the possibility for virtual power plants, in other words, for end users to play a part in the energy system, offering energy back to the grid at times of high demand. Vehicle to grid has been discussed a lot. There have even been a few trials of EVs feeding power back into the grid, but to date it's not been widely available, and that's partially to do with the technology needed by the individual. There are two ways we might get energy out of an EV, DC or AC. The battery in an EV is a DC, a direct current source, so at first that seemed a bit more straightforward. However, the grid uses AC, alternating current, and so something has to convert the DC in the car to AC, and so offboarding with DC required an EV owner to buy an inverter for vehicle to grid. The tricky issue with that was the chicken and egg problem. In low volume, they would be expensive, very expensive, with one currently available model costing over £6,000 including installation. As is often the way, prices would fall as volumes grew, as the learning curve was traversed and manufacturers found ways to do them more cheaply at larger scale. But getting to scale requires quite a lot of uptake, clear signs of widespread adoption, and it's difficult to get that when early adopters have to buy such an expensive device, something that is only of benefit for vehicle to grid. Therefore, maybe DC is not the best approach. Maybe that is just going to be too hard. So perhaps power offtake using AC is the answer. That might make sense. An EV has a DC battery, but they all use AC motors, so they already contain very high power inverters. If they could be reused to do the job, the costs might be lower. And indeed that is what we are now seeing. Even before vehicle-to-grid becomes a reality, manufacturers are offering vehicle-to-load, the ability to power portable AC devices off the cars as an extra feature to entice new customers. So if the car can do the conversion from DC to AC, then the box on the wall at people's homes can be much cheaper. It doesn't have to do all that much, making adoption simpler. The final piece of the puzzle, though, might be interoperability, the ability for any car to offload to any charge point. Car manufacturers would love to sell you a proprietary charge point, one suitable for just their cars. But that becomes a bit impractical when the charge point needs installing and people need to retain the ability to change their cars as they see fit. So what we probably need is a standardised mechanism for doing offloading, a standard protocol that the cars and charge points can speak across. Well, the good news is that we now have one. For those who have been following the channel a while, you might remember that I did a video discussing whether public charging was too complex. In that video I discussed plug and charge, and whilst doing so mentioned the standard ISO 15118, the standard in which plug and charge is defined. During the conversation I mentioned that ISO 15118 was an enabler for many things and was likely to become a common standard in charger-to-car communication. ISO 15118 defines a bunch of useful communication mechanisms, some of which are useful in a public charging scenario. However, it also defines the communications necessary for bidirectional charging, in other words V2X, including vehicle-to-grid. So whilst ISO 15118 is a useful standard for public charging, it also has benefits in home charging, and indeed this protocol is what will enable vehicle-to-grid for us charging at home. This protocol then, ISO 15118, will become ubiquitous in time and will be used everywhere. That isn't the case yet. Chargers don't necessarily all support it yet, and neither do many cars for that matter, but that is the way we are going. In June 2025, the EU passed a regulation requiring that all public charge points in the block support ISO 15118. Initially, an older version of the protocol was acceptable. However, the latest version must be supported by all new charge points and by existing charge points that are undergoing refurbishment from the start of 2027. As you can imagine, this is a significant boost for the protocol on the public network. Its full implementation will not be particularly fast, but its ubiquity seems to be guaranteed by this legislation. But how does this affect us for home charging? Well, I think we need to start being aware of this protocol and how important it will become. In my home setup, I delegate the scheduling of my EV charging to my supplier, namely Octopus Energy. My Omi Home Pro is integrated into Octopus's API, and when I ask to charge, I don't say exactly when. Instead, I say when I need the car next and at what state of charge. The charge point then contacts Octopus to ask when it should do the charging, letting Octopus determine when that most suits the grid. What Octopus is doing is determining when it can buy my car's electricity the cheapest, and therefore when they can make the most profit from me. I benefit because they offer me a lower rate for that charging, and Octopus benefits by optimising the purchase of energy, as well as by selling the ancillary service of demand flexibility. And so it will be with vehicle-to-grid. Even if just a subset of people participate, there is money to be made from the system existing, and so it will. To take part in that, though, you need compatible equipment, a compatible car, and a compatible charge point. To be clear, you can't opt in yet. There are still a few hurdles to be overcome, a few bits of regulation to be finished. Vehicle-to-grid is not ready for the mainstream at the moment. Therefore, I'm not suggesting you rush straight out and buy a replacement charge point. That's not at all appropriate yet. It would be spending money on something that isn't possible or proven at the moment. But if you are about to spend money for a new home charge point, either because you don't have one yet or you need to replace a broken one, then you should perhaps consider getting one that is capable of supporting ISO 15118. In order to be able to support the standard, a charge point needs to have a specific piece of hardware within it. The protocol makes use of power line communication, also known as PLC, for which the charge point needs a PLC chip. When the appropriate bodies complete their work on enabling V2G, a charge point would probably need a software update to comply with the standard, to fix bugs and deal with any unexpected decisions that are made. But what we know for sure is that it needs the hardware to do it. Software can be changed, but the hardware is fixed at the time of shipping, so that's why this is relevant. Certainly, if I needed to change my charge point at the moment, I'd consider whether I wanted something that has a PLC chip, something that says it's capable of V2G. Remember, nothing currently is capable of vehicle-to-grid in practice because its exact implementation has not yet been finalised, and therefore nothing can demonstrate that it can do it in practice. For that reason, don't buy a charge point just for that. At this point, it's just a promise. Anything you buy needs to do a good job of what you need it for straight away. But if something seems to do what you want at the moment, and contains the PLC chip needed for things we will do in the future, then that might have a longer useful life than one that doesn't have that chip. When it comes to what's on the market, at least here in the UK, options are quite limited at the moment. So far, I've found 3 AC charge points on the market for home use. Those are the NextBlue Point 2, the Zaptec Go 2 and the Humax MX7. The NextBlue and the Zaptec only come in untethered formats, whereas the Humax is available in both. All 3 of them offer 5-year warranties, so at least there is some protection against any issues you might experience with them. EcoFlow talk about ISO 15118 being important in one of their blog posts, but their charge point, the PowerPulse 2, does not seem to be compatible. I wonder if we might see something from Indra too. Their Smart Pro is used as part of the Octopus Power Pack package, which is a tariff that makes use of vehicle-to-grid. However, this appears to be a custom and perhaps proprietary implementation for Octopus and is not currently available for purchase from them. I haven't seen or tried any of these charge points, so this is not a recommendation for any one of them, but they are models to consider if you are looking now. I'm sure more will be announced soon too in the coming months and years. We are starting to get major consensus on how V2G will happen, and everyone is starting to realise how important ISO 15118 is becoming. ISO 15118 is a major enabler for a whole host of useful features. This is the standard that will unlock a lot more from our EVs in the future. That future isn't quite here yet, but we finally have an understanding of how we get there. In summary, ISO 15118 is a protocol that is capable of supporting a lot of useful communications between an EV and its charge point. This is what underlies plug and charge on the public network, and that may also be useful in depot scenarios, if a charge point is publicly accessible but privately owned and intended for a limited fleet of vehicles. But the communications it defines also include those necessary for V2X, a suite of bidirectional charging mechanisms, including vehicle-to-grid and vehicle-to-home. There is no point changing an existing charge point for something with ISO 15118 just yet. We also need support from cars and energy suppliers for it to be useful in practice. However, if you have to buy a home charge point, either because you don't already have one, or you need to replace one that has failed, then consider getting one that supports ISO 15118. A charge point that contains the PLC module needed to engage in the necessary communication is likely to have a longer useful life than one without it at this point. Thanks for joining me today out here in the field amongst the crop. One of my supporters asked me recently whether this was a computer-generated background, but no, I'm really here. Why fake it when I can be here for real? That way we can all get to enjoy the scenery and watch the crop mature through its full life cycle as we go along. I hope that brings you as much pleasure as it brings me to be here. If it does, and you'd like to show your support for the extra effort it takes to be here, then there's a link to the Buy Me a Coffee website in the video description, as well as a QR code on screen to the same website if that's easier for you. A drink would be very gratefully received. What's more, if you've liked the video, then it is a big help to me if you click the thumbs up button. And I'd love to have you as a subscriber of the channel if you want to see more from me. Subscribing is free and helps ensure you know about any future videos I make. Finally, I hope to interact with some of you in the comments. I hope a number of you will join in the conversation down there. Tell me what you think about ISO 15118. Do you see how useful it will be in the future? Are you looking forward to vehicle to grid or vehicle to home, or are these things you would not want to participate in? If that's the case, I'd love to know why. Let me have your thoughts in the comments section. I look forward to hearing what you have to say about today's subject. Thanks.